Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. My next guest is Plaine. He's an accomplished sports photographer and a master fine art printer. He also happened to grow up a stone's throw away from the original Yankee Stadium. So he's here this episode to share some of his memories of going to the games back in the 1950s, as well as discuss his long distinguished career as a photographer and fine art printer. So let's bring him on. Hey, Paul, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to it.
Pleasure having you on. And, people can follow you on Twitter at
Yeah,
Ballpark Prints, as well as you have your website, www.ballparkprints.com, where people can see some of these lovely prints that we'll discuss, as well as where they could purchase them as well. So this gives a background about yourself. You have, you're a person of multiple talents, obviously a sports photographer, but also a restorer and archivist as well of some old vintage baseball pictures.
yeah. Well, I grew up in the Bronx, and I grew up right by Yankee Stadium. So the stadium was always there, and it was like right out my bedroom window. I lived in the hybrid section, which is actually up the hill from where the current stadium is now located. So the baseball was always just a part of life. As a kid growing up in the Bronx, art was part of my life. I kind of, you learn these things early. It comes natural. It's not something you develop. You develop the skill, but you have it, and it's an inclination that you actually gravitate towards. So I was lucky to have a wonderful career involved with all the coming up through advertising and, like I said, working on Sports Illustrated and working with lots of sports photographers and things like that. You just get to know these people, and you just mindful, of their work, and you have your work, and so you just kind of eventually, you kind of meet somewhere, and they let you in if they want to, and I was lucky enough to be let in. But growing up, it was the Yankees, and that's why we're here. Primarily speaking, is I'm a Bronx boy. I love it, and I was very fortunate that I had a baseball family. My uncle and my aunt were personal friends of Don Lawson, and my uncle was his best man at his wedding, and my aunt was the maid of honor, and but I didn't know that initially. I was a kid, I'm like 8 years old, so what do I know about that stuff? And but my uncle would take me to the games, and he had two box seats, one behind, one in the Section 5, which is right behind where where the catwalks were, and where Mel Allen and the sports writers sat, and they always had a bar at the top of the staircase there, called the Section 5, and only men could go into the bar. So my aunt didn't like to go to the games, and my uncle would take me, because women were not allowed in and where the sports writers could go in to have meals and drink and stuff. Women were not allowed in that section at all, and that was not changed actually until like 1973. I remembered it well because it was just we were at the games, and there was Mel Allen's hat, right there, and I would lean over, and they had these little black and white monitors. They were like the size of not even 8 by 10, and that's how they were viewing the games, because you couldn't see a lot of the action because the way the darkness went and the angles went out from the stadium, and with the overhang from the third deck, it was like pitch dark, and when the ball went in the air, you didn't know where it went. So you had to track the outfielders, and my uncle would be, I was a kid, and my uncle would say to me, just watch the way the players run and all that stuff, and so it was a lot of insight like that. But it was a lot of fun, and it was interesting. So I got to meet also, like I said, all the sports writers, but they would have to pass his seat, and he would introduce me to them. It was much different back then because the game was a little bit stiffer. You weren't, it wasn't so friendly if you went to the baseball games. Like if you went there early and you went down to try to be around the batting practices and stuff like that, if you were in the stands and things like that, players could not interact with fans because of this big no betting rule. It was very rigid. Players couldn't toss a ball into the stands. The ball players couldn't wave at a fan or do any interaction if they went over to catch a pop foul at first base or down by third base or something like that, the fans kind of pulled away, and the player would grab it and just walk away. Or sometimes they would look at a fan and just like be a little annoyed about something, but there was no kibitzing, there was no talking and stuff like that. As I grew up and moved on, I just always stayed involved with baseball, and it was just a part of my life. And then I was in the Army, and I was out of the Army, and Mickey Mantle disappeared, and it was sort of a strange thing for me, Mickey Mantle disappearing. I got involved with photography, got involved in advertising, and that's how I got involved with Sports Illustrated. I got to know the Sports Illustrated photographers, and then I would run into them at ball games, and they'd say to me, "Well, stand next to me, come with me." And they would say I would go with them, and I would be right there with them and then I would have my camera with me, and I would be shooting also. So it was like a great experience, because I was in a different end of the photography. It was more of the advertising side of it and not the sports action side. So it was a really good experience for me because it was a different type of photography. And it allowed me to be involved with something that I loved, which was baseball.
So when you were, let's say when you were with these Sports Illustrated photographers and you were kind of maybe going on your own, were you like taking your own pictures then and able to,
Yeah.
sell those and get those out into the
Oh,
media?
yeah. Sure. It was outlets and things like that. You could do that. Uh, it was a little different because today it's instant. If you do something, you shoot, you go back to your hotel room, you upload the stuff, and you just send it right out. But then you had to get it processed, and you had to you had to get it processed overnight. So photographers, I saved one of my old tanks. I have like an old developing tanks. So I shot a lot of black and white. So you'd come home, you'd develop the film yourself overnight so that the film could get out. Because it wasn't in the camera digital, plug it into the computer, it's out there. You had to do work, so the work had to be done. In the case with Sports Illustrated people, they had labs and stuff, and I knew the lab business too because I had a lab. My partner, we had our own photography company and stuff like this. So, but it was a process and it took time, so it was a little different. Now if a game ends, you go on the computer, you go on NBC Sports or something like that, Fox Sports. The shots are coming in while the game is on. If you're looking at it, you want to look at a recap of what's going on in the baseball game, they have pictures being uploaded. I mean, that's the way it is today.
Compared to the technology now versus, the film of decades ago, just, do you have a personal preference or is there, you kind of like
Oh,
certain
I like the
aspects of each?
digital. I like the digital, you can shoot, you hit that button and and instead of having the motor drive on the camera, you had them, the way the older way worked is that the film was that you had a motor drive and you could have an extended back, so you could have a roll of film that could be 100 feet long. Not well. It's like you could shoot 300, 200 shots, say, and it'd be a big roll of black and white film or color that came through the camera, and the cameras were kind of big and a little bit heavier. But today it's digital, and it's like there are no mistakes. Before, you had to make sure that your lighting was correct for the night shots and that you were shooting at the right apertures and stuff like that. Today, it's really, and I tell people who buy the cameras, I said, look, Canon, Nikon, they spent $1 billion making this. So, they programmed this camera to work the way it should. Don't overthink. You don't have to overthink it. Think more about what you're trying to capture and how to be a better photographer with trying to capture the moment, the angles and different perspectives, when to come in and when to come back, and the camera lens. But the camera itself, they're idiot proof. I mean, they really are. I mean, and when you're shooting off, you can shoot 12 frames you can shoot 12 frames per second. You're looking at things like there's a mistake in there, yes, and there's also something good. I miss the film for the color richness and the textural part of the film because all the digital is so clean and pure. But the old film had had grain, It had, had different saturations of color levels, Kodachrome, I mean, which was the best. But you can't beat what the digital does. I mean, it's just too easy.
Gotcha. And of all the pictures you've ever taken, whether it's sports related or not, Yankees or baseball related or not, do you have a favorite or one that this, kind
I
of
have a
interests you?
few. The ones that I like, most people don't.
Hmm.
Uh, I have one that uh, I was in Safeco Field, and when I'm at the ballpark, one of the things I want to do is I want to photograph ballparks so that the fan can see the ballpark and get a sense of what it means in angles and stuff like that. Because when you watch it on TV, you're seeing a specific angle of a picture, and you see something happen. You don't know it. You don't relate to it how it is really in the field. So what does the ballpark really look like? So you want them to see how the fans see the game from all these different angles. And today, because they allow you now to circle ballparks where you don't have to be blocked off. They used to block off the bleachers. All the ballparks, you basically had the bleachers blocked off because that was a cheap seat, and they didn't want them going in. They didn't want to buy a cheap seat and then have them drift into the expensive seats. So I try to bring a perspective to the ballpark of just so they can see the different ballparks. So I have different shots that I really like Safeco Field. I was up on the roof and I was standing behind the sign Safeco Field, and I took a picture of it backwards. It's curved out, and I liked the shot, and the sun was coming down. Different things like that. There are some I like the shots. At San Francisco, I took a shots of the where the glove and the Coca-Cola. I climbed up into where the glove and the Coca-Cola bottle is, and took shots from up in there. So like I said, I try to find different. The feels, you want to get the angles and stuff like this, and you want to give it the fans a sense of the playing surface. But you don't really know what the playing surface is really like when you watch TV.
In addition to taking pictures, you also restore a lot of old vintage pictures.
Yeah,
Prints. So
that's
how does that process work?
well, you scan. You either have the original negative, which is mostly they don't exist because they were glass. Many of them were glass plates, and they were different, thrown at different things. Um, I restored one. I bought a picture. I used to go to baseball shows, and I was interested in not baseball cards and things like that. So maybe 40 years ago, I bought a picture. It was slightly rip broken. I have it on, and it was Christy Matheson pitching in a game on May 8th, I think it is, 1913. Might be off by a day or two at the Polo Grounds. So I had the picture sitting there. So I scanned it in years ago. I scanned it in a high resolution. You have to have a high resolution scanner. I scanned it in a very high resolution. I brought it up, and it was all pitted and it was all broken up. So I just start off in a square, and I start off in a specific area, and then I work across the picture, and I go through grids of the picture, and I work on restorations. And then like I'll look at if there's something slightly missing, and like in part of the say detail of the grandstand or something like that, I will look at another section of the detail of the grandstand, and I will replicate that into that area just to fill in a small area and stuff like that. And you go in there, it's a very slow process, restoration like that. But that's the only way you can do it. You just but sometimes you have to go in and you do a little drawing. You kind of like you have to dig out the face or something, but it's just a slow process. I some of that, but I did one of restoration. It took me like 40 hours.
Hmm.
On a shot of Yankee Stadium from the when they were building it. I spent actually 40 hours on that picture because I timed myself on it. I knew it was going to be difficult. Your fans might think this is crazy, but I've decided to divest of my archives. I have It's going to take me probably 3 or 4 years of scanning and stuff like this, but I'm going to get rid of the shots
Hmm.
that I have. And I just, you know, there are people who want to have original stuff, and that's fine. There are collectors of that, like there are collectors of many other things. and I'm going to let this stuff go. And but I will retain the rights. So, and I do sell, and then if somebody specifically, and I'm going to set it up, if you want to specifically order something from me, I'm going to set up that you can contact me and I will custom make that for you. I have done that for a couple of people for restaurants. I did a restaurant in Saint in Jupiter. I did. A guy opened a restaurant and he found me and he saw that I had these original shots of Shea Stadium opening day 1964. I went to the game. I took pictures and he bought 3 or 4 pictures from me and I made them up to Pacific scale sizes for his restaurant.
Yeah, so you just feel like you just want to get rid of them and feel like just have maybe just a small amount of available prints. Is that it?
Oh
Just,
well, I have the files, so I can make them. I can make the prints on demand now. The whole technology is all different today. Uh, I'm, you know, I'm putting together this, and I have some of the material in another room there. I'm going to put together a box set. I'm going to make this specific box set, and I can do whatever I want because it's my material. So I went to the last game in '73, and I took a fair amount of shots, and then I had the idea back in '73 for ballpark prints. I actually thought of it a long time ago, and but I just it was the technologies weren't there. And then in 1999, the technology started coming in when Epson brought in these printers, and they could just do on demand and stuff, and it was archival and different things. But then again, I worked on it. I worked on this about 15 years ago, and then I stopped again because it was just got sidetracked to other events. I actually had I had 100 I had custom boxes made by a company, a couple I found on the internet. They made all the boxes for the commemorative giveaways for the White House.
mm,
And they were up in someplace in New York State here. And I had 100 archival boxes made with linen outside, and I had a picture put on top. And so I decided, now I'm in the process right now of making them. I'm making 100 sets of 25 images on 100% cotton rag paper, this is all archival stuff. Yankee Stadium, and I had to go through it. The hardest part was editing. So I'm starting it from a certain shot in 1922, and it ends in 2010 when they're just smoothing out the surface of where the old stadium sat and the new stadium is in the background. So I had to figure out what would be the 25 shots that would give you a history of Yankee Stadium photographically. And so I've spent a lot of time doing that. I must have probably edited this thing for a year.
wow.
Because,
And really quickly, just as we close up the episode and going back to the old Yankee Stadium and your early memories, you told me a great story
oh,
um, about Old Timers Day, which is quite different than the way they run Old Timers Day now. Can you just tell the
oh
fans
yeah,
about this?
Old Timers Day then was really cool. I went to Old Timers games, and my uncle started taking me. And I was at an Old Timers game, and then they brought out first. They had the guest of honor, and the guest of honor at this Old Timers game was Connie Mack, Ty Cobb, Cy Young.
Wow.
I saw them walk out on the field. I was probably 6 years old. But it's things you remember. And so the way they did the Old Timers game was that the Yankees would always be the Yankee team, and the other team was the teams of all the players that either played they played in the American League and the National League. They played players they played against, or famous players and everything. And they would invite them to the stadium every year. And these were guys from the 30s and the 40s, and these were the best, these were the best players of that era, that came to the stadium every year, and the Yankees would play a game against them for 3 innings. So it was like, and so at the time when I was seeing these guys, you don't realize I was actually seeing like King Kong Keller, and he was actually not a bad ball player still. These guys were in much better shape than than the newer players. I think the modern game destroys these players physically in a way that the older players were not injured like that. And it was really exciting to see these players. And I didn't realize, when I saw the player, and I think back now, and it's like, wow, I actually saw Ty Cobb walk on a field and Cy Young uh, and I did see, you did see the like the stars from the 30s and the 40s and stuff like that. A Hank Greenberg would play in a game. Things like that. Where you going to get that chance? And I always disappointed with the way the Yankees do the old timers game, because the Dodgers do an old timers game and the Yankees do it, but nobody else really does it. So if I would really like to see the Yankees play like, so you would like to see like maybe this players from the 70s or the 80s that the Yankees played against come back on the stadium field as the opposing team, because they're not as and play the Yankees in a game, play them for the 3 innings instead of the Yankees against the Yankees. That's what that's the part I miss. I think it just had a better flavor to it.
I totally agree. I think that would be more interesting. Yeah, because having pinstripes versus pinstripes, yeah, just you're watching it
Yeah.
doesn't seem right.
So imagine going to a game and you're sitting there and Butch Hobson or you're looking at players from from the six, maybe a Ken Griffey Jr. comes back, or
Exactly.
Edgar Martinez, or Pedro Martinez would come in or something like that. Because I think the players themselves wanted to play. I mean, they did that Crackerjack old timers games, and they have the Luke Appling, I think it was, it hit the home run, and he was like 69 years, 70 years old. He hit a home run in a game off a pitcher. But I think that, yeah, I think it would be much more interesting for the fans today. They would go to the game. The old timers games, you couldn't. They were sold out all the time. They were the best. People. That was a game that fans like targeted to go to that game, because they were going to see players. I mean. Duke Snyder, and I remember going to the old Yankee games and stuff like that. And they did a little bit up into the 70s and they stopped, but Ralph Branca, Duke Snyder and these players like that would come in. Willie Mays played in one briefly. So yeah, it would be, I think, a real treat for the fans to see the players again from the opposing teams that the Yankees faced, and bring them in from any team, even from teams in the National League, and if they did and stuff like that. So I think that it would be a much more enjoyable for the younger kids. It would give them a sense of baseball history. I don't know, the 1960 World Series. I just like. I went to some of the Yankees lost two of the games in the stadium, which they shouldn't have lost. And I was at the game where they blew them out and Bobby Richardson hit the grand slam. I mean, it was like it was a Saturday afternoon game. Uh, I mean, if you look at the Yankee scores in those games when they won, I mean, it was crazy. I
Yeah, they
mean,
killed them. If
it
you
was
look
like,
up,
six, I think what, Whitey Ford, like 16-2 was that game before this game 7. And in fact, even in game 7, it was just an amazing game. I mean, it was an amazing game. If that game was shown today on TV, if that was a game was played today on TV, people say that was the greatest game they ever saw. I mean, the fact that when Mickey Mantle dove back into first base in the top of the ninth, there was a play, and there was a play where if the ball was fielded, and I believe it was Dick Stewart, and he fired to second, which took the force off. He stepped on first, and he fired to second, and Mantle turned around and dove back into first base. And when it happened, the announcers, because the way they used to announce the game was Mel Allen would announce half the game, and the other team's announcer would announce the other half of the game. And I believe at that point I was the announcer for the Pirates, and he said Mantle dove back into first base, and he says he's got to be out. They thought he was out. There was like for a split second nobody understood that the base was now free, and he could return to the base.
okay.
And Mantle was actually a very smart ball player, and he had the wherefore to like realize, okay, he saw that happen. He saw the play. He saw him step on first, and he realized he knew to turn. He says, "Why go to second base? I'll just be out. They'll just tag me out, but they have to tag me. The force is off." But and to think like that quickly in that moment, it was an amazing game. I mean, when you think about it. the way it went, the scores went back and forth like that. I mean, it was a lot of scoring, and the game was only like 2 hours and something minutes.
And again, not starting Whitey Ford for that game seven, or how I think that's what got Casey Stengel ultimately fired.
I had a long conversation with Hector Lopez one time about Casey Stengel, and it was very interesting comments about him. Because he came to the stadium he came to the Yankees at the end in '59 and '60, and he played again. He played on that, and he was with Casey for 2 years. And he said Casey would be falling asleep in the dugout and stuff like that. He said, but he said Casey would walk down the dugout and he would turn to a batter and he would say, grab a bat, you're batting. And the batter would be like, okay, he's going to pinch hit. And he told me later on, he said, Casey knew that the pitcher that was coming, if they brought a new pitcher in or something like that, that this guy, and he would match a lefty against a lefty. Casey would know that this guy throws a breaking ball that breaks into lefties, and that this left-handed batter was a dead breaking ball hitter, and that it wasn't like it wasn't like he didn't play. He played what the player's strengths were. It wasn't the matchups. The matchup was based on how that batter could bat against that pitcher.
Gotcha.
And it was so he said it was different, but he said in 1960. I hope nobody gets upset when I say this, and I hope Hector doesn't get upset. He lives in Long Island. That he said that there were games where Casey was asleep in the dugout. And not that he was 69 and I'm 74 now. So I mean, it's like I'm thinking, 69 I was feeling pretty good. So I'm thinking that it's a long season. You've been doing this for Casey has been doing that since 1915 or something. And it's hot, and they did have air conditioning in the Yankee dugout and stuff like that. But you get tired. You get older, you get a little tired, and so it's kind of a shame. But I don't know. He should have pitched Whitey Ford, and had Ford pitched 3 games. I mean, he was your guy. He was the best guy. He was the best pitcher.
Well, appreciate coming on, sharing all these amazing stories. Again, you witnessed so much great baseball history, and mentally, and also capturing with photos. So again, people can follow you on Twitter at
Oh yeah.
Hog Prince. Check out the website.
But I really appreciate you reaching out to me. 161st Street and River Avenue. I know it well. I used to catch the subway there all the time. Uh, unfortunately, I have a memory of a million stories, and it's not enough time.
All right. Well, we could get you for a future episodes. So we'll have you back for some more stories. How about that?
That's fine. But thank you again. I really appreciate it, and thanks, James.
All right. Thanks, Paul.